Hey folks, in case you missed it, the single barrels have started rolling in. Both barrels of the Jack Daniel's single barrel barrel-proof rye are available through Hudson Wine Market, with direct links in my social media pages and Instagram bio. These also went out to patrons with a special discount code. These barrels have been going so quickly that honestly, I don't even know if there are going to be any left by the time this is posted. So if they are available and you want them, trust me, don't wait because someone else is going to grab them first. Next up is the Barrel Rye finished in Armagnac casks. This is going live on October 2nd. This incredible pick was done in partnership with the guys at This Is My Bourbon podcast. The Timbip guys are great friends, and I'm thrilled to have this barrel come into the shop. On October 2nd, Patreon members of both podcasts will have first dibs with free shipping for Patreon supporters. No limits, no minimums, free shipping for Patreon supporters. So up your Patreon pledge now if you want to grab them before everyone else and get that free shipping code. Just want to take a quick second. Thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to all the supporters, especially my friends on Patreon. You've put a ton of investment into the pod and the site through the years, and as these single barrels start rolling out and additional products start rolling out, I'll keep providing as many perks as possible to those who have supported me along the way and continue to join. If you're not a patron, if I was on the outside, sounds like now's the time to join. All right, enough updates. Now on to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today we are going over to Ireland. We're going back across the pond, and we're going to, one of the westernmost points of Ireland, which is County Kerry. One of my favorite places that I've ever visited, one of the most beautiful spots in Ireland, already a beautiful country to visit. And with us is Sir Maurice O'Connell, who is behind Wayward Irish Spirits, the Liberator, and Lakeside Estate. And with that,
hi, David.
Welcome on.
Thank you very much for having me on board. I'm glad you've been to Kerry and you've loved it. That's we like to share what we have here, and it's great that you enjoyed it.
Oh, it's absolutely gorgeous. Geographically, just to put in people's minds, it is the southwesternmost county. So basically, the peninsula on the southwest coast of Ireland, that is County Kerry, and it's when you think about the green of Ireland and Emerald Isle and all of that, it's hard to beat going through the Ring of Kerry, the hills of Killarney. And I didn't think it rained that much, but maybe it was just because it was over the summer. I don't know.
Yeah, it rains slightly more in the summer. Well, this year it has anyway. So we do get a lot of rain. It's what keeps the land green and the people looking so young, apart from me.
It works. No, you too. It may be audio only. I'm not letting you get away with that one. So first off, I wanted to ask where the title comes from, where the Sir comes from.
One of my great grandfather, Queen Victoria, came to visit Killarney in 1862, and one of my ancestors was one of the great and good in Killarney who was involved in receiving her. So as a result, a few years later, he got a title for it, and decided to build himself this new house that we're in now in 1870, more fitting to his new station. He promptly died the next year, so never really got the chance to enjoy it.
Well, that is a shame, of course, but beautiful house. Of course, I haven't had a chance to visit this particular house, but the pictures on your website and of just doing some searching online, it looks just picturesque as could be. So in doing the research, I looked through a bunch of interviews and listened to many of them. And of course, everyone would address you at first, introducing Sir Maurice O'Connell, but no one ever asked where the Sir came from. So like
a couple of people have, but I don't use it. I mean, it's of absolutely no value to in Ireland especially. But if it marks me out as being that person with the title and people remember the whiskey because of it, so much the better. So.
Fair enough. So yeah, we're here talking about Wayward Irish Spirits. It is fairly new, as far as Irish go, new whiskey producer. We'll talk a little bit more about the distilling and potential distilling down the line in this interview. But for now, Irish whiskey producer, blender, finisher, and bonder.
Exactly.
So, starting at the beginning of the company itself, you launched on kind of both an auspicious and, in retrospect, unfortunate date.
Yeah, February the 29th, 2020.
Right.
So it was a leap year, and 2 weeks before a certain pandemic closed the world down, which seemed at the time to be a huge problem and a huge disaster. But in retrospect, it meant that a lot of people were at home trying new whiskies. B, it meant that we could get to people, we could speak to people online just as easily as the big boys could. So it sort of boosted our advantage, I think, to launch then. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll look back in another 100 years that that was a little blip at the start of the company. Hopefully.
And with so when you launched, you launched with the Liberator?
Yeah, we have two brands, the Liberator, and the first expression of which is the malt in tawny port finish, which you've had a sample of, and yeah, we launched that, and then shortly afterwards brought out a blended whiskey. So most of I really love port finished whiskies. I have a very sweet tooth, so you'll find that a lot of my whiskies suit that palate. My view was that if I wasn't able to sell them, at least I'd be able to enjoy drinking them. So fortunately, I've been able to sell a few and not have to drink it all. But most of our whiskies are the result of really fresh port casks, and which we get direct from the Quinta in Portugal, and they're refilled here within 3 weeks. So if you're buying from a wholesaler, they can be sitting around for 6 or 9 months drying out. Ours are wet when we refill them, and obviously you get that big boost of flavor from that.
And as you mentioned, I've been able to try the Liberator, the malt finished in the tawny port, and I would say it does lean towards the sweeter, but I felt it was very balanced in doing so. You know, I like sweet to a certain extent as well, but it didn't get to a point where the one where you lost the whiskey, which is important for me, but also where the port took over. It felt more like kind of between a port and a PX in a way, like a little syrupy fruitness, also bright red. But yeah, it was balanced, and that for me, that's the biggest thing with finishing. As long as it's balanced, there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, and it's quite difficult to get that right. There's a lot of fiddling that goes on to try and get that. So we would generally use casks that have been whiskey that's been finished in first fill, second fill, and third fill port casks to get that balance right. Of course, with the tawny. Sorry, of course, with the tawny, you've got that nice drying finish to it as well, which comes through, and I like to make sure that we've still got that.
No, definitely, that comes through. Again, not too much. It's still in balance. Like I'm someone who's very sensitive to over wooded whiskeys.
Okay.
So too much of that astringency, but no, this was nice. It was drying in a mouth-watering kind of way. It drew more moisture in rather than completely drying you out.
Right.
So I quite liked it. And going back to your self-professed sweet tooth, I know one of your favorites, I believe, is the Redbreast 27.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, yes, definitely. It's not something I get to try very often, but we did have, because where we are is so beautiful. We had a certain we had Jameson whiskey came and had an event on our land in a huge glass marquee this time last year, and just to entertain their American distributors. And kindly they invited me along afterwards to enjoy the free bar, which included copious quantities of Redbreast 27. So I did my fair share there of that.
No, it's one of my favorites as well. It's quite rare, and even more so when you find it, it's usually out of reach for me in terms of price. It's $500, $600, $700.
Yeah, and yours at the same level. Yeah,
yeah.
So it's not an everyday drinker.
No, for sure.
For us,
but for us, yes. But there was one other that you mentioned on one of the podcasts. It was the Bushmill Steamship collection as well.
Yeah, and some of the Glenmorangie port finish whiskies. Those were inspiring for me to start with. But then you have to try and do something different because much of our whiskies will be younger, at the younger age group. So, and I was very conscious that I wanted to do something different, but wanted to make a whiskey that was impactful, that people would remember. If some people don't like it, as long as there's a good contingent of people who love it, that's what I'm looking for.
Makes sense. And yeah, not everyone's going to like everything, so can't please everybody. But I like the approach of making a whiskey that you would like to drink. Because you're right. At the end of the day, if it doesn't sell, which this has clearly, but if it doesn't sell, well, then you've got a lot of whiskey that you'll like.
Yeah.
That is much more affordable and in reach than the Redbreast 27.
Yeah.
So you said, jumping even further back, you said that the idea for a distillery or a whiskey company, however it was going to manifest, really started around like 20 years ago, or even a little bit more at this point. But it was a slow burn over that 20 years.
Well, it wasn't possible. In Ireland, the only way you could produce whiskey was in a huge industrial complex like Irish Distillers. I mean, their site is many acres of production space, and it wasn't possible to produce whiskey at a craft scale. And it was, for me, the journey started. Well, the thing that generated the spark was I bought a mirror about 20 years ago in London, which had on it O'Connell and Flynn Irish whiskey, and this was has followed me around for the last 20 years, and it was never more than a pipe dream until in about, I think, 2012, Dingle Distillery started up in Kerry locally, and showed that you could actually produce whiskey on a craft scale, and after that it became a bit more possible to do it. Also, you weren't able to buy wholesale whiskey. So what we do as whiskey bonders, we commission spirit from lots of different distilleries to our mash bill, our specification, and we lay that down in our choice of casks, and we choose the maturation journey that it's going on. Until about 2015, there was no wholesale whiskey available to startups like myself. But in 2015, you had people like Great Northern and West Cork starting to make wholesale whiskey available, and so the idea of the business then became possible.
And so there's two directions I want to go with that. First is that Dingle is nearby for you. It's the Dingle Peninsula is pretty close. So
20
it's not
miles away.
20 miles away. So it's not even that it would be, you see a craft distillery in Ireland, but it's in some, different part of Ireland, maybe way up in Donegal or on the East Coast, where you've got to think, okay, it's completely different terroir, different environment. It was nearby. So you could see not only was it possible, but it was possible in your relative area.
But to be honest, actually, I was working in London at the time, and I only heard about it when I got the prospectus for Dingle Distillery. So, and I know a couple of other people for whom that was a point of inspiration as well. So this was before they actually got up and running, and before they actually even had anything to sell. So that was about 2012.
Right. And but still, just a couple of years later, you were creating your own plan. This is 2015, 2016-ish. And
well, we really started in 2018 when we got revenue approval for our bonded storehouse on the estate. So we have a 300-year-old stone building in which we mature our whiskies, and we do all the blending and the bottling there. So it was only 2018 that we actually had revenue approval to do this. So that was really when the hard work started.
Even so, thinking about then between, let's say, the different inflection points, you see the Dingle prospectus, which says, okay, this is possible. You see them producing, which is even more so is possible.
Yeah.
The idea comes to your head to say, we're going to try this on our property in our way. Then you get the bonded warehouse where you can start actually producing the way you want to, blending and producing. And then 2020, when you launch, there's a lot of inflection points at a very short period of time.
Even more than that, David. There was right at the start, we were in touch with, and this would have been about middle of 2017. We were in touch with a guy in Scotland who'd put a deposit on some Muller stills and didn't have the funds to complete the purchase. So we were in talks with him about bringing his stills over to our property and starting distilling on site. At the end of it, his wife decided she didn't want to leave her family in Scotland, so it never happened. And I actually think we dodged a bullet, because if we'd been trying to do that at the start, it would have been a very different journey. And I'm sort of happy the way the journey has been so far. We will be distilling on site probably 2026. And that was a bit delayed by the pandemic, but it's definitely on our radar.
And so you mentioned already, and this is also from Irish Whiskey Review when you were on with them, but you mentioned a couple already. Yeah. So you source from 7 distilleries, across Ireland. So the 5 that you were allowed to name, and this was from 2021, so this may have changed, but the ones that you were allowed to name were West Cork, Cooley, Great Northern, Clonakilty, and Dublin Liberty. And then the other 2 were to be kept under wraps until they were in the bottle, I believe, right?
Yeah, and also we've got a couple of casks from another distillery that we will never be allowed to name, but it's just particularly nice liquid, and it will add to the blending that we're doing. And it's not necessarily important to be able to say where it's from. They don't want us to reveal it, so I'm happy not to. But we like to be transparent about what we do as much as possible. But if other people have issues with our naming them, well, we won't do that.
And it was interesting for me, at least coming from an American perspective, to hear you be able to even say the 5 of the 7 you were able to. Very often when it comes to sourcing in the States, it's NDAs everywhere.
Yeah.
You kind of have to guess. If it's Indiana, you can kind of guess where it's from. If it's Tennessee, you can kind of guess where it's from. But once you start getting into other states and it becomes kind of a blank canvas at a certain point. So,
and the thing is, you can't fight this. The way the world is going is transparency and provenance, and people want to know where their food, where their drink is coming from, and you certainly can't fight that. The whiskey world, in particular, is filled with geeks and nerds, and I include myself in that, who want to know and they wonder why you're being cagey if you're not giving out that information. So I'd rather just be on just not have to worry about that and just be as open as I can be.
No,
Um,
it's a nice thing from the consumer side. I like that. I mean, these are distilleries that, yeah, I've tried things that were distilled at Cooley. I've tried things at Great Northern. I don't think I have tried from West Cork, Dublin Liberty, or Clonakilty by this point. I know there are a lot of Irish distilleries coming online in the last couple of years, so I know I'm definitely behind.
42, yes, you're
42, yeah, I'm
way
definitely
behind the
behind.
curve.
Yeah, but still, it gives me a reason to then go to those distilleries and try to find some of their products.
Mm.
Of course, Cooley and Great Northern is easier because they're huge and they supply many different distilleries in addition to their own brands. But maybe I think West Cork and Clonakilty I've seen around. Dublin Liberty I don't believe I had heard of before. But it gives more reason to explore the Irish whiskey scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the two that you couldn't name and maybe still can't. I'm obviously not going to ask you what they are.
You're picking at this now, aren't you?
No, I'm not going to ask you what they are. I certainly don't do that ever. I just more wanted to ask about the, I guess what I would consider like a conditional NDA, where you can't say who it is until it's in the bottle. I was just asking about it because I've never heard of an arrangement like that before, and it fascinated me as an example of one an NDA, but also to ask maybe if you can share why it would have been arranged that you could do it after it was in the bottle, but not before.
But I was insistent that we would be able to do it when we bottled it, but from their perspective, they probably don't. If they've got their own liquid coming out, they don't want confusion about that. And if we bring it out earlier, how does that affect them? And and generally, what we promise to do is that we're not releasing it as their liquid,
Right.
just as a single malt or a single pot still. We're using it in our blends.
Absolutely. And like I said, I don't do gotcha questions, so I'm certainly not asking for any early reveals. Nothing of the sort. Uh, yeah, it was just an interesting arrangement. I get the concern of the confusion, but also because you're being transparent about we're not just getting from this one or two, we're getting from seven, then there are different amounts in each blend. Uh, I would hope that at least from the consumer side, we would see the two, let's say the two products next to each other and say, okay, we know that this is from this one distillery. This is a blend of multiple distilleries. Obviously, they're not going to taste the same.
Mm.
Plus, they'll have whatever your own sense of place and scent of blending is. So that was
Well,
really
on
just my reason for.
on at least one of those, one of their concerns was that we'd just be we'd just be producing the same liquid that they were, but with a different label on it. But
Sure.
from what I'm trying to do here is to build up a library of flavors and style to blend together. I don't want to bring out Clonakilty pot still with the Liberator name on it. It will be a component of a whiskey that we make sometime in the future.
And so, what led you to using not only these distilleries but the number of distilleries? You could easily have just done 2 to 3, let's say, but there are 7 as part of the blend.
Yeah, it's well, no, the seven is what we've got laid down. So we're not
Okay, so
using those. Some of them are this year's new make. I mean, some of them will be now 5, 6 years old. So we're not using all of them at this stage, but it's to add to the DNA of what we can offer.
gotcha. So it's really more about the providing yourself with as many tools as possible and flavor profiles as possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, were there any distilleries, and you don't have to name them, but you can just be a yes or no on this one. Were there any distilleries that you really wanted to get liquid from and they turned you down?
Yes.
Okay.
Lots, lots. I mean, a lot of people don't want are very wary about their liquid appearing in somebody else's bottle, and they've obviously got the cash, not they're enough cash to not need money from me. So good luck to them.
Gotcha. So let's jump into the blending aspect. So this is more talking about the Liberator, the malt whiskey, and also the blended.
Yeah.
And so just to set this up a little bit, there's an historical angle to this where blending is a very old Irish tradition, especially with Bonders. And
yes,
you think about all of the different Jamesons and Spots and all of the different brands that were, and many still are, blends, as opposed to being what we would consider kind of a single malt. For kind of newbies getting into the Irish whiskey scene, the two terms I think that we're hit with the most are single pot still and triple distillation, as these hallmarks of, if it's Irish whiskey, it's single pot still and or triple distilled. If it's not those things, then it's something else. Now, as you dig deeper, obviously it's not true.
Yeah,
you can have
the best,
right. You can have the redbreast that's a single pot still next to the Jameson, just triple distilled, and not necessarily have both or either of those, and still call it Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
So new distillers like you, like Dingle, Waterford, Slieve League up in Donegal, are all showing that neither of those is required to make a great whiskey that's identifiably Irish in style.
Right.
So starting with the Liberator, what led you to use two malts in this rather than going a single pot still or triple still or some other style?
I hate the idea of single malt, single pot still. As being, the Scots have done such a good job of convincing the world that the best whiskey has to be a single malt, which only means it's from a single distillery. It's no identifier of quality. Also, that has to be 12 years old. They have done a fantastic job. I keep hearing in any of the markets we start talking to people, they say, "Oh yes, well we're looking for a 12-year-old single malt." Well, I say, "Yeah, but there's other things out there other than a single malt that's 12 years old." So I wasn't particularly bothered about trying to make something that was a single malt. I wanted a malt whiskey. I wanted I wanted the maltiness of the malt to come through, and I just happened to have stock from Great Northern and from Cooley that blended very well together. So that's what I decided to use. Apparently, it was the first time it had been done in Ireland for a long time, but that wasn't the point. I only found that out later, and I don't think that necessarily makes it interesting or I don't think there's anything particularly interesting about it being two single malts blended together. We send a little bit of it to China, where they actually call it a double malt, twice as good. So we've been using that in other markets as well.
Not bad marketing. It certainly works. But so knowing that you started with the older stocks from Cooley and Great Northern, and if I have my notes right, it was anywhere from 5 to 14-ish year old stock that
at
you
the start,
had
yeah.
at the start. We've already talked about your kind of these whiskeys that inspired you beforehand. Though they inspired you, did you go in wanting to kind of emulate that profile, or was it more you wanted to see what you could do to find something that you enjoyed from again a blank canvas?
Well, to be honest, we had the malt in maturing in tawny port casks, and this is the liquid that we had. and I like the idea of a port matured or port finished whiskey, and this was what I had, and I made the best of what we had, and I liked what we had, and I have tried to continue making blends that are similar to that in the different batches that we do.
And you've said that each batch is going to be slightly different. You're not aiming to be exactly the same each batch.
Well, we use Oscar Wilde's great aphorism that consistency is the last refuge of the uninspired. So we use that to justify the fact that each batch will be different. And actually, what we find is that people have people prefer one to another, and it encourages people to come back and maybe try another one.
And obviously, I've only had one batch so far. I believe it was batch 5. I mistakenly left my bottle outside.
States, yeah.
So even with the batches being slightly different from each one, which I like that idea as well, because it's experiential. It means you want to go after these different batches to try them. I guess, how close do you try to hew to a central stem, if you will, and how far do you allow yourself to branch out in the profiles?
We try, but again, it's dependent on what stock is available, what is tasting good at the time, and we're not like Irish distillers and we don't have a warehouse full of 2 million casks, so we have a much more limited palette to work with. But we try and keep the same, roughly the same style, but each one will be different.
And with the port casks in particular, you said the turnaround time that you're getting is incredible. 3 weeks is.
Yeah, but then it has to be in those casks for. The first fill is usually 7 to 9 to 11 months. The second one can be 2 years. The third fill is another 2 years before you get a different liquid to blend with. So we don't necessarily have all the same exact. The components will never be the same every time. So we might not have the stock of third fill or first fill that we need, so we'll try and work around that.
For the podcast too, are you usually using them? You stop at the 3 times and then.
So far, we're not. We don't seem to be getting much beyond the third fill. So, and what we've done a couple of cases now is we've given those off for beer collaborations, and we're just waiting to see what some of the results of that were really stunning, but we'll have to see what we can get out of those.
And you have, for those port casks, as you kind of alluded to earlier, in order to get that kind of a turnaround time from Portugal to Ireland in 3 weeks, so they're still wet when they arrive. You got to have a connection there, because you need to be able to grab it.
Absolutely, because my wife has family in the north of Portugal, and where they are is the summer place of the port wine families. So we've got our neighbours are Taylors, Symingtons, and a lot of other port wine families. And although we're not getting from Taylors or Symingtons at the moment, being in the area and knowing people does definitely helps to get access to casks. The first casks, because we spend time up there in the north of Portugal. My wife insisted a few years ago that I learn Portuguese, and so my first casks I actually negotiated for in Portuguese. So it's sort of kind of amazing that I didn't return with a bathtub rather than some casks.
And have you continued learning the Portuguese, or you think you're good right now with
I was over last week sourcing casks, and it sort of comes back to you after a while. I hadn't been there for a couple of years, and if you're not using a language, you lose it quite quickly. But yeah, I was able to communicate. But then a lot of people do speak English there, so I'm saved most of the time.
And I think port, we certainly see it in finishes over in the States. I think it's certainly not drunk as much as similar to sherry. The fortified wines aren't drunk as much as regular wine versus whiskey. There's that in between where if you see a fortified wine, it's generally used more in let's say cooking or cocktails rather than just on its own and appreciated on its own. But having said that, of course, you're using Tawny port. Now, was there any experimentation with other types of port, like a ruby or?
Yeah, we do on our double port. This is our blended whiskey, which is, I don't know why I'm showing it to the camera because we're on audio anyway. But just so you know, that is our what we call our premium blend. It's 42% malt that has been finished in Tawny port casks. The balance of it is grain that has been finished in ruby port casks, hence double port. So I like it. The ruby port is very different. It's much more berries, much fruitier, and it works very well with the blended with the malt and Tawny.
So you said that it's more red berry for the ruby port. How would you describe, for people who may not have had this specific port, what would be a Tawny port profile?
Figs and stone fruits that would be for me the outstanding elements of that.
I think we've had like I said, we've had more and more port finishes over here, but it's not always made clear whether it's Tawny, ruby, than something else. So it's really dependent on the taster to be able to pull them out.
Yeah, there hasn't been many, even in Ireland, there haven't been many Tawny port finishes before we brought ours out, and there's a few more now, which is including the Redbreast have brought out a Tawny port finished pot still, and that will help the market learn about port and learn about Tawny port, and hopefully will widen the market for the rest of us.
I should hope so. It's a nice market to get into. I'm certainly enjoying it from this perspective. So I'd love to dig a little more into the blending process that you have, and just started simply that you said once that you can't do the blending because objectively every cask is the best that you've tasted.
Well, your own babies are always beautiful, and I most of my casks are delicious in their own way, and I have a lot of casks that I sort of keep aside behind for single cask releases. But I actually do eventually have to use them in blend, so I can't keep them all specially. No, I do need other people's input in it, and there's a group of three of us who do the blending. We have a Scots guy who only really wants to do things the way they're done in Scotland, and I have a Swiss German lady who helps as well, who gives me a perspective on how we fit into the rest of the world of whiskey, because we're not just competing against Scotch whiskey, we're competing against world whiskey, and I'm the third leg of the stool, and there's me trying to convince both of them to put more port finish stock into the blend. And as I'm the one who pays, it's usually I get my way more often than not. But it's as you rightly pointed out, it's quite difficult to get a balance. And for me, if I was doing it on my own, I think it would probably just be very unbalanced. Which some people like, and we do some single cast releases which are hideously unbalanced, but people really love them. So there's room for both.
As the time we're recording, I will have had 3 single barrels just come out recently in the last few weeks, and that led to a discussion of single barrels and what they should be, I guess, or what people what people idealize them as being.
Yes.
I usually go by, it should be the two ends of the extreme. It should either be the most pure representation of what a brand is about, so like the very core of their profile and what they would go off of if they had a chance or a choice, or it should be something so either off profile or out there that it couldn't be blended in. It's really special and needs to be on the end of that extreme and shown on its own. Because if it's in the middle and it can be blended in, then it might be a good cask, but might be as special. But that's just my perspective on it.
I'm with you on that. Yes, it does need to be one of the two, because the most things you actually need to be as stock for blending. So it's the outliers that are the ones that become single cast releases.
Right. And with so you're on batch 5 of the Liberator. I also wanted to ask, with the blending, that you specifically say on the website that you do a slow proofing process so as not to stress the whiskey.
Yes.
Yeah. And
that this is part of our secret sauce that I'm glad not everyone else does. I mean, in industrial whiskey, what often happens is that the water all gets added in one go, and that can stress the whiskey and cause saponification, which is a sort of soapy taste in the whiskey. What we do it comes from the cognac tradition. They cut their cognac to bottling strength over many years. But we find that 6 weeks cutting from cask strength, which might be around 60%, to our bottling strength of 46%. If we do it over 6 weeks, we find that actually gives a much better mouthfeel and much better integration to the whiskey. And I'm glad that not everyone else does the same thing. On some of our whiskies, including our Lakeview Single Estate whiskey, which we haven't talked about yet, but I'd like to tell you about, that one we've actually cut over 6 months, and we're cutting it in the cask. That's not. We only did that because we didn't have the bottles or the labels in time, so we had the time to do that. So, but still, we're still trying to do that over 3 months, and the difference to mouthfeel to the integration is really noticeable.
This month's Impact Spotlight is on Nichneen. Founded by Annabelle Thomas, Nichneen has a pioneering approach to spirit making, putting innovation and sustainability at the forefront. Through Nichneen, Annabelle seeks to change the way the world thinks about whiskey from Scotland, and to create a whiskey which could exist in harmony with our planet and its inhabitants. Nichneen has created a spirit with exceptional body and sweetness, showcasing their smooth and elegant house style. This is achieved through a combination of sourcing high-quality organic Scottish barley, gentle fermentation and distillation processes, and maturation in a combination of 3 carefully selected cask types: ex-American whiskey casks, STR, shaved, toasted, and recharred casks that held red wine, and a small amount of Oloroso sherry casks. The result is flavors of lemon sherbet, juicy stone fruits, and spiced rye bread. This whiskey is set to disrupt the industry through Nichneen's commitment to sustainability and creative approach to distilling. With an uncompromising focus, the small team of eco-conscious drinks fanatics also dedicate 10% of their spirit production to trialing different yeasts not commonly found in whiskey distilling, all on their journey to seek out and find new flavors in their whiskey making. If you're a longtime listener, you know how interested I am in whiskeys and distilleries like this, and how excited I am that Impex is now bringing it stateside. Annabelle will be visiting Chicago for Whiskey and Barrel Night on October 25th, and will be hosting special masterclasses featuring the key components of Nichneen, along with their core organic single malts. These tastings will also include a sneak peek of Quiet Rebels Gordon. Only 630 bottles of the special one-time-only release will be coming to the States, so it's a release and an event you won't want to miss. Nichneen Organic Single Malt is currently on its way to specialty retailers across the U.S. For more information and questions on where to buy, please contact the Impex Beverages office at office@impexbev.com and follow on social media to never miss a release. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. I'm firmly on the side of slow proofing. I always have been, even before I really understood what it was and heard the terms pontification before. And for you and I've definitely got some questions on the lake side too. So I promise we won't be leaving without talking about that. But with the Liberator, the other thing that I wanted to ask about was the bottle design.
Okay.
And because I had heard the story, but I want you to retell it because it's a fascinating story on how that design came about.
Are you talking about the Liberator or the Lakeview Single Estate?
They've
all got stories.
That's true. That's true. So I was thinking of the perfume bottle story.
No, that's for the Lakeview Single Estate.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So that's this bottle here, which is Lakeview Single Estate, which is from my own barley, grown a few hundred yards away from where I am, and matured in our bonded storehouse, which is 200 yards from where I am. So it gets separately malted for us. When we first started, I took the first crop we have is 2018. I took the barley. I phoned the local malting company, and they said, "Oh yeah, happy to malt it for you." Our batches are 120 tons. Our first crop was 10 tons. I wanted to have 5 tons malted. And they said, "Yeah, give us your 5 tons and we'll give you 5 tons out the other end." But that wouldn't be mine. So it took a while to find a man up in County Kildare near Dublin who started doing small batch malting. So he malts in 5-ton batches. So we can stand by that ours has been malted separately and is our barley, and then it gets distilled for us separately by Great Northern Distillery, and then comes back to the estate for maturation. To tell you where you are with the bottle, it's in a sort of decanter shaped bottle, which my wife says looks very like Chanel number 5, but that wasn't the idea. But the inspiration for it came from a bottle that we had lying around in the house when I was growing up. And it was a bottle of perfume that had been given to my grandmother on her wedding day in 1923. And it had a glass stopper which had fused into the glass neck. And as kids, we'd be offered money, probably to keep us quiet, but if we could open this bottle, and we were never able to. So it sort of became an iconic bottle inside the household. And it always sort of frustrated me and intrigued me in equal measure. So when we came to decide on the bottle for the Lakeview Single Estate, I wanted to have this decanter-shaped bottle, like the perfume bottle. It turns out that there's an even more obscure story on it. The Liberator is named for one of my forebears, a man called Daniel O'Connell, who was a huge civil rights Catholic rights and anti-slavery campaigner in the 1800s, and known as the Liberator in Ireland, and often called Ireland's greatest son. So our Liberator is named for him. On the Lakeview single estate, the bottle of perfume, the original perfume bottle, was for a brand called D'Orsay, Parfum d'Orsay, which was started by a Count d'Orsay. And as it turns out, somebody told me afterwards, after we'd launched this whiskey, that Alfred d'Orsay had been a very good friend of Disraeli, the British Prime Minister. And as with many other people, Daniel O'Connell had upset Disraeli. So Disraeli had challenged Daniel O'Connell to a duel and actually asked this man, Alfred d'Orsay, to be his second in the duel. Alfred d'Orsay refused, so the duel didn't go ahead. So that was a good thing. But all these, I love all these historical connections. We try and use our historical connections in our barrel choices. So we've been importing wines and spirits from Spain and Portugal since 1450. So we try. That's what started me on the port journey, So we like the connections. So getting back to the Lakeview single estate, that is matured here, and so we've got the. I know you're a big Waterford fan, so we've got the terroir of our barley. So for better or worse, this isn't classic barley growing territory, because our weather is very changeable, and if we get storms, which we often do, the barley can lodge and you can lose the crop. So it's not an ideal crop to be growing here. We've been growing it here for decades, but we've been wasting it on animal feed until about 2018, when I decided we could probably do something better with it. And so it gets distilled for us, Great Northern, comes back here to be matured. And I was telling you that we have very variable weather. So my theory was that because of this variable weather, we should be getting a lot more cask interaction here than elsewhere. And that should mean that our whiskey matures more quickly here. And we've been measuring the temperature now in our storehouse for the last 5 years. And as you probably know, whiskey interacts with the cask when it's above 7 degrees. So we have a maturation season here where the temperature is above 7 degrees because of where we are with the Gulf Stream over where we are. And we have a maturation season of 10.5 months of the year. Now that compares with places like Speyside, which have 6 months of the year. Interday, we have these huge changes in weather. It can be raining in the morning, sunny in the afternoon, mainly raining most of the time, but we can have sun and then snow in the winter, that is. So it is very variable. But we released this Lakeview single estate in November last year at 3.5 years old. It's a pot still whiskey. Pot still whiskies need to be slightly older to be at their best. But this 3.5-year-old whiskey, most people are saying tastes like a 7 or 8 year old whiskey. And that is because of our maturation microclimate.
Yeah, I think both with Drew on Whiskey Lore and it might have been the second.
Oh, you have done your research.
Oh yes. And I think on the second episode of the Irish Whiskey Review, you were saying also not just the temperature, but the air pressure, because of all these storms and the weather coming through. The pressure is going to force more interactions.
A change in weather is a change in pressure. So that's presumably causing the whiskey to go into the cask more or contract from the cask.
Sure.
And there must be something that has made this. It's a nice whiskey as well, which is great. It's not just a fast maturation story, because you can taste whiskies that mature very quickly that actually aren't that wonderful. But there must be some reason for it tasting much older than it does. And I ascribe that to the climate.
Absent any other variables that I can think of, I can't see how you'd be wrong on that. It's such a fundamental thing about aging and about maturation. I would think that that's at minimum, it's the most prevalent variable there.
Yeah, I mean, but everyone has every whiskey maker has a special story, whether it's the well that's blessed by Saint whoever, or I mean, there are many other stories, but this is our story. I did meet Mark Rainier in a car park the other day, and tried to have conversation with him about maturation terroir, but didn't get very far. But he was very pleased that I was using my own barley.
It's a goal to have Mark on as well. I got to talk to the Waterford team, of course, with Mark Newton, but I've got, because there's so much to discuss there. As I'm sure you know, I'm also talking to his team about the science of it and trying to get an episode just devoted to the science of how they're figuring that out. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah,
and I love diving into that. And that reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you, which was about your barley. So you had been growing this barley for for years before we wanted to do whiskey from it. Did you have to change varieties?
Yes. Yeah, because previously the what you're looking for is starch rather than protein. When you're making whiskey, starch converts to sugar, which converts to alcohol. So when you're growing barley for animal feed, it's protein you're looking for. So we did change varieties. We're using Laureate. I don't know if that means anything over there. Yep. And also that is a choice we have here because of our changeable weather. The second year we grew our crop. We tried Olympus, and some was Olympus, some was Laureate, and most of the Olympus grew too high, and there was a storm, and it fell down, lodged on the ground, and became useless for malting. So there are lots of conditions at play.
Sure. In some ways, it's not too dissimilar, I think, to when you look at different peat styles and how both on Islay and on Orkney, opposite ends of the Scottish peninsula, or the Scottish mainland, I should say, you have two islands where the winds are so strong that trees don't really grow there.
Yeah.
So instead, you get in Islay, you get the bog peat or the maritime peat, and in Orkney, you get all heather.
Mm.
And it's because the trees would get knocked over because they grew too tall, but heather stays close to the ground and not too high, and so it eventually survives. So it's part of that place of what can grow is the best thing that should grow.
Yeah, the sense of place, I think, is really important to in whiskey making. Well, for us anyway.
And before I forget too, you mentioned that every bottle has a story. So I had confused the perfume bottle for the Lakeview instead, but I'm guessing then that the Liberator also has a story behind the bottle.
Not a historical story, but an awful lot of work went into it. It's an unusual bottle in that it's sort of cylindrical in shape. A lot of the old whiskey guys tell me, "Oh, it doesn't look like a whiskey bottle." So, yeah, I mean, what's the point of doing the same thing as everyone else? The whiskey is different, so I mean, the bottle might as well be different. We chose it for aesthetic reasons. The stopper was a very conscious choice. We went through. I think we tried 7 different types of cork stopper to see which one made the nicest noise coming out and which worked best. So yeah, there was a bit of work that went into that as well.
And look, there are podcasts where it may not be the focus of the entire episode, but they start and they're friends of mine, they start the episode with a cork pop for whatever they're drinking
Oh,
that
right.
day.
Okay. Yeah.
And if that cork pop isn't impressive, they hear about it. So, but at the same time, if it is impressive, you also get to say, "All right, you win that day." So, I really do love the bottle design, it being cylindrical, and of course there'll be pictures alongside the reviews of this. But it's very easy still to hold, to pour the wide. The mouth itself widens at the top, so you can pour it without spilling, and it's easy. So I quite liked it, and for a bottle also that is not that expensive, it has that aesthetic quality to it, which I can appreciate. And
You're saying I
right
should
now,
put my prices up?
well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but maybe let me buy a case first, and then we can do whatever you want. Um, but yeah, I appreciate having. There should be some bottles on your shelf that don't cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but still are, if you'll allow me to put it this way, pretty enough to put at the front of your shelf so people can see it. And I think this bottle fits there. I know it sounds like we're jumping around a little bit between the two products, but jumping to the Lakeside for
Lakeview.
Even more now. Lakeview, I'm sorry. I keep saying Lakeside.
No problem.
I apologize for that.
No problem.
So the Lakeview Estate, and I have it written in two different ways in my notes. That's very sloppy of me. The Lakeview Estate are not only using your own barley, but aged in STR red wine casks.
Yes.
And you did mention the house that they come from, or at least one of the houses they come from.
I think we won't put that out
we'll hold that.
Yeah.
So
I have to be careful with that because I won't be able to get any more. That's right. One of the other things about cask suppliers is they don't want. It's different for whiskey suppliers. Cask suppliers don't necessarily want, until they know what the quality of my work is. They don't necessarily want to be associated with a new brand, and who can blame them? They don't want their name tainted if it's not going to benefit them. So. So yeah, we expect that. I'm happy to share with people individually where the casks come from, but I just have to be a bit wary about saying it too much in public.
No worries at all. I think so. As that, I know one of them. Let's just say, which we can say with safety, it's a very well regarded house in France, and if you've had any of these wines, you'll appreciate the cask. But so even so, by shaving, toasting, and recharring them, it's a quite a different process than you're using with the port casks, where it's coming over wet and right away.
Yeah, but these casks are also. I mean, the turnaround is in terms of weeks there as well. So they're getting freshly emptied and being processed in Bordeaux. It's not exactly shaving because normally it is shaving because they're using a plane to shave the individual staves, whereas with a normal STR cask, what they'll be using is a flail inside the cask to get rid of the old char before recharring it, and that tends to seal up to close some of the grains, whereas if you're shaving it with the grain, you're not closing up the grain of the wood, so you're still getting a lot of interaction with what was in the cask before. If you look at the color of this Lakeview Single Estate, that I mean, you can see that there's a lot of red wine influence from that in that 3.5 year period. So
yeah, you would never pick that out off the shelf as I would say less than 10 years old, just on color alone, of course. And we know color can be manipulated, but
which we don't do. Just to...
no. Yeah. To be clear, they don't do that. No chill filtering. But it was more just to say that it's quite a lovely color. It's a nice amber, light amber color, which for a 3.5-year-old whiskey you don't usually see unless it's really heavily finished.
Actually, in reality, it's much deeper than it's quite a deep amber color. But the choice of cask is obviously hugely important. But for me, what I would judge where judge the cask is often by you want to make sure it comes from a house where they've got enough money to look after them properly. B, you want the liquid that was in them beforehand to have been of exceptional quality. With those two, and C, you want them fresh. So with those three conditions, you stand a decent chance of being able to make a good whiskey out of it. We have other releases which we bring out every few months called Storehouse Specials, which are little half bottles, which can be single cask releases, cask strength versions, or trials of blends, or also occasionally just to show off what we can do. But one of the ones that we've done there was a Muscatel sherry cask finished whiskey, and that's been hugely popular. But sherry doesn't really. I'm not a huge fan of sherry, but I was given a bottle of the sherry that was in these Muscatel sherry casks, and I was so it was stunning. So on the basis of that taste, I bought the casks, and it was a fantastic decision because they had a really fantastic effect on the whiskey. Some of it is coming over stateside to Ohio in early next year, so you might be able to get some of it then.
I got friends in Ohio. I'll figure something out over there. It's notable that you were able to have the sherry from the cask. I mean, sherry finishing is more common, certainly, than port.
Yeah,
and we see it a lot, particularly in Scotch. But because sherry, as you notice, it's not as many people are drinking it, so the quality can be all over the place with the casks. It can be just seasoned and then dumped down the drain, and then you have a sherry seasoned cask. But
and what they're seasoning it with is it can be vinegar or wine that will go to vinegar. But if you've got good quality liquid in there to start with, that's a good start.
Absolutely, and start with the good quality. You'll have something that undeniably will be better quality at the end.
Hopefully, yeah.
So, just to look to the future of Wayward Irish, not only do you now have three, I would say, lines, you've got experimental casks and releases coming out. I heard it's also included trying to get some Guyana rum casks. I think you had Barbados ones, but you were still trying to get the Guyana.
All right. You've been talking to somebody, okay, because I mean, on my maternal side, my mother's family went to Guyana in the early 20th century, and then on to Barbados from there, and they started a trading business there. So we like to, as I say, we like to connect with that history. The rum cask, there's possibilities there as well. So,
and I do want to know before I ask you my last question here, which is, before I ask you my last question, I do want to know there's so much history behind the brand, behind the name. Got, just as a preview, of 900 years of history on the site where you are right now, between your mother's family and then your father's family. First the McCarthys and then the O'Connells. Wow, excuse me. First the McCarthys, then the O'Connells. As you can tell, I have not had anything to drink this morning, so I am tripping over my words. But the only reason, I should say this for the listener too, is the only reason that I'm skipping for the large part a lot of this history, including that of Daniel O'Connell and many of the different figures and happenings that happened here, is certainly not just for the purpose of skipping him. It's more because I want to get into more in-depth answers. And there are several fantastic interviews that Maurice has given, in addition to the website itself, the brand's website, to learn the story, some of the real nooks and crannies of the story, and the fun facts, such as, like you said, the connection between D'Orsay and the perfume bottle. And, these are all things that add to the experience. So I did want to note there's a lot of history that is being skipped over for this particular episode, but I encourage
Well,
people to listen. Yeah.
I was sort of expecting you based on your email because you contacted me originally because you'd been I'd listened to your podcast with Justin Green at Bertha's Revenge, and
Yep.
your initial email said, "As a recovering medievalist, I'd be
Mhm.
very interested in your story." I was expecting to have to give a bit more chapter and verse on the 1450s, but
Yep.
we'll do that another time.
Yep. It really came down to, of course, I was very interested in it. Don't get me wrong on that. It more came down to in doing the research and listening to other interviews and podcasts. I know that it had been covered in a way where I didn't feel that I had a question beyond what I've asked already that I could necessarily add to the story and to the storytelling.
Okay.
And so in that way, I just ended up cutting that for um, other questions about process and about thought process. So that's really it. I'm still a recovering medievalist, and so and when I hopefully get to visit sometime, I will, that part of me will just come out like you've never seen. So um, yeah. So with the looking to the future, you are planning to add a still, two stills, I believe, at some point in
Yeah,
the future. Now, it was originally 2024, but you said the pandemic delayed it to
yeah,
26.
yeah.
But paint us a picture. What does that plan look like?
We're in our whiskey complex. You might have seen pictures of it in the on the website. There's a two-story old coach house, which is just next to the bonded storehouse, backing onto the barley fields. So we plan just to distill the grain that we grow on the estate. So for the Lakeview Single Estate whiskey, uh, and alongside that, the whiskey bonding side under the Liberator brand will continue because we've got lots of whiskey laid down to keep us going till probably 2030. So there's a lot of maturing whiskey there, which we'll be able to use over the next few years. So the whiskey bonding side is a really important part of the story, and the Lakeview Single Estate is of this place, and we want it to be. We want to share what we have here with people, and whiskey is a lovely medium for doing that. And if it's your own whiskey, it's even better.
Totally agreed. And I believe, again, check me if I've gotten this wrong, but planning for a 500 and 1,000 liter stills, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
All right. Well,
but
I
to
look
be
forward to
honest,
seeing those.
that there's beginning to be quite a lot of stills available for purchase on the market. So it will be probably governed by what we can get. Uh, I love the idea of people making their own stills, but yeah, I'm not sure I've got the headspace for that. I'd love to do it, but another step. Um, there is just too much going on at the moment, and and just getting headspace for things is tough.
Fair enough. And I'm thankful to know a couple of people who either made their own stills or kind of got stills and adapted them. And it's I think it's not for the faint of heart, because if you mess up a little bit, like, you're still could blow the top off, or
Yeah,
something will crack. And so
yeah.
I think there's people who are really good and love to do that. And I would not be in that. I would not be in that group. I would be very much like, just give me the still to these specifications and go with that.
There's
But
also cost comes into it as well. So
oh,
I
for
might
sure.
I might yet be converting a milk carton, milk crate into a still. See how it goes.
Well, there's in addition to the 900 plus years of history, there is a lot of future yet to come for Wayward Irish Spirits, for the Liberator, for Lakeview Estate. Um, I'm going to keep in when I said Lakeside, because well, no, I'll see if I can double it up. We'll see. Because that's my error. I should have caught that earlier. But in addition to Liberator, Lakeview Estate, and all the different expressions coming out. There'll be more expansion into other countries, into the States. As you said, we're in New York and New Jersey right now, going to be in Ohio for that product in the new year. I'm excited to introduce more people to these brands and have them taste it. And
thank you. That's good. It's if you're a small brand, you don't have huge numbers of people walking the streets pushing a whiskey. So generally, what we try and do with our export markets is go to places where people have fallen in love with what we're doing and will push it that way. That's the only reason we're in Shanghai in China, is that the guy who runs our importer there just fell in love with what we were doing and runs with it. So I'm happy for that.
Always good to have fans in your corner, and you've definitely got one here. So, Sir Maurice O'Connell, thank you so much for coming on to the Whiskering Podcast to talk about Wayward Irish, talk about not as much of the family history as you might have expected, but still some of the family history, but talking about the brands, how you thought about it, how it all came to be. Hang on with me for a sec after recording, just to close out. But we will also have in the show notes a review of the Liberator that I got to try, links to all the social media where you can find them online, where you can find them to buy if you're in New York, New Jersey, or know people there who can find it for you. I definitely encourage you to try it. This is another episode of the Whiskering Podcast. Hope you all enjoyed our trip over to Ireland, to Killarney, and I will see you all next week. Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskering Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or at Whiskering Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.